Now, one of the most powerful features of the Canon M50 is the fact that it's an interchangeable lens camera. That means that you don't have to just stick with the kit lens that it came with. You can put a whole bunch of different lenses on it. And the different lenses kind of change the camera. They almost make it into a totally new camera. The problem is lenses can be expensive. This tends to be the number one reason that I see people adapting vintage lenses to their Canon M50s. And make sure you stay tuned to the end of the video because I am going to tell you how I got some of these lenses for very, very cheap or almost free. There is a little trick that I've got, and I will tell you that at the end of the video. And one of the biggest things I want you to take away from this video is just because you're adapting a vintage lens to use on your Canon M50, it doesn't mean you're getting a lesser lens or a lesser image quality. And case in point is this little lens that I've got here. This is a $60 lens that I bought on eBay, and this lens, or a copy of this exact lens, was recently used in the most recent Batman movie. Now, I can tell you that the kit lens on the Canon M50 is a very, very good lens, and I'm really quite happy with the image quality that comes out of that lens. But it can absolutely promise you, you're not going to find a Hollywood movie out there that announces that they use the kit lens from your Canon M50 to shoot some of their scenes. The reason they shot with this little lens, this little $60 lens, is not because they couldn't afford a better lens. It was because this lens gave the image quality that they were looking for that specific scene. So understand, by adapting vintage lenses, you're not only getting very inexpensive lenses to use on your Canon M50 and expanding the capabilities of your camera, you're also getting a type of image quality and a unique image quality that you really can't get just about any other way. And when I talk about the difference in image quality that you're going to get with a vintage lens compared to your Canon M50 kit lens or any modern lens, probably the biggest difference you're going to notice is that the vintage lens is going to be slightly lower contrast. Now, you actually might think that you're going to get a less sharp lens. But in general terms, and the lenses that I'm going to talk about in this video, that's not actually true. You're mostly actually going to get sharper lenses than you are with a sort of modern kit lens. Where you are going to notice the difference is in the coatings. So modern lenses are getting better and better coatings, and these coatings are giving us a more contrast or high contrast image. A modern lens is going to give you an image that kind of looks a bit more like a cell phone image than it does something you'd see in Hollywood. A vintage lens is going to, straight out of camera, look more like something you've seen in Hollywood or something a bit more cinematic. Now, as I said, I've only paid $60 for this lens that was used in the Batman movie. I've got a number of other lenses here that I use. I think I paid under $100 for the one that I've got on the Canon M50 here now. I've also got a birding lens that I have used on a number of occasions. I think I paid $30 or $40 for this lens. And in fact, right now I'm actually filming this segment, the talking head part that you can see me in the video here. I'm actually filming this on a 24mm vintage lens. I didn't pay over $100 for any of these lenses. And I'm constantly buying and selling vintage lenses. And one of the great things about having a vintage lens or using a vintage lens is right now vintage lenses are either holding their value or going up in value. This means that you can actually buy one on eBay, which is where I pretty much buy all mine, use it for a few months, and when you're done with it, you can put it back on eBay and get all of your money back. You haven't actually lost any money. It's just a short-term investment. And in fact, in a lot of cases, the value of that lens has actually gone up in the meantime, so you might even actually make money. The whole idea of adapting a vintage lens has only been made possible by the fact that with mirrorless cameras, they've eliminated the mirror. And that means that the lens itself sits farther away from the sensor than a modern mirrorless lens does. And all we've got to do is just take a adapter. Effectively, it's just a spacer. And on one side is the mount that fits in your camera. And on the other side is the mount that mounts on the lens. Now, the important thing about this is you just need to make sure that the adapter that you're getting is an EOS M or EFM adapter, because that's what the Canon M50 is. It's an EOS M or EFM mount. And then the other side of the adapter just needs to match whatever vintage lens you bought. And there's a few different popular ones. The Batman movie one is a 42mm M42, I think it's called. It's like a circular, just thread-on filter that you just sort of screw on and off. This is one of the most popular ones, and there's just so many of these great lenses out here. This M42 screw mount. Most of my lenses are M42 screw mount. The other one that's very popular is Canon FD mount, which was the previous model of sort of Canon's lenses. And this one is the PK mount, which Pentax PK mount. So those are probably the three that I recommend and use the most and have had the most experience with. And I also only buy K&F Concept adapters now. I've gone through a few different ones and I have a few different kinds here, but the K&F Concept are absolutely bulletproof. It doesn't sort of move around. And as I said, I'll link those in the description down below, but don't go with the generic ones. Just go with the K&F Concept. You know you're going to get something that works, and they're like hardly any more expensive. Maybe $5 or $10 more per adapter. It's really nothing in the scheme of things. Now, what lenses should we be looking at adapting? And there's really sort of two main ones that you want to look at, and that is 35mm and 50mm lenses. These are the ones that are the most common. They have been made for the longest, and there's the most plentiful supply of. And when we look at those two different focal lengths, there's a couple of different brands I would recommend. First of all, Canon FD is very, very good. It has gotten a little bit more expensive now, but if you can find a good deal on a Canon FD piece of glass, either the 35 or 50mm, they hold their value. You'll be able to sell them down the track, probably for more than you paid for them. So the Canon FD is very good. They're also sort of multi-coated, so they're almost like a modern lens. They only just have a slight vintage feel. Now, the other ones are Helios lenses, the Helios 58mm lenses. The Batman movie one is called the 44-2. Once again, I'll list all this and link it below. My favorite is called the 44M. That's the first model they made with that same lens technology that's involved in the lens that was used for the Batman movie, but they multi-coated it. So once again, it has this sort of vintage feel, but it's got a little bit higher contrast. There are some Zeiss lenses, the Jenna Zeiss range it's called. I don't know if you've heard of Zeiss, but they're like one of the most famous lens manufacturers in the world, Carl Zeiss. Now, probably the biggest challenge for a lot of you is going to be the fact that these are manual aperture, manual focus lenses. So I just want to go over that, how that's going to work and how you're going to make that easy for yourself when actually using these lenses. Because they're manual aperture, it means you set your f-stop on the lens by just twisting a little ring on the lens. It clicks back and forth. You can see on the lens, it'll show you what f-stop you're on. So it's pretty straightforward. You just turn it to what f-stop you want. Most of the time with these lenses, we're trying to get this cool blurry background effect. We're just going to turn it to the most open aperture we can get. So on this lens here, it's f2. On the lens I'm shooting this video on right now, it's f2.8. So in general terms, I would just put the camera in aperture priority and turn it to whatever aperture you want for the look that you're going for. And once again, you pick the smallest number to give you the blurriest background. But if you want a more depth of field, which means you want to have more stuff in focus from the thing that's nearest to you in focus to the thing that's farthest away in focus, then you stop your aperture down a bit, which means you make that number bigger. You might go f4, f8, something like that. You pick that number, that is going to set the way that your image feels, and that is how shallow that depth of field is and how blurry the background is. Once you've set that, you kind of know that's where you want it and that's the style you're going for. You don't actually have to touch that again. So that's just set in place and you can go around and start shooting. Now, the manual focus obviously is a little bit trickier, but the Canon M50 gives us some really powerful tools to be able to manual focus really easily. And if you haven't had experience with manual focus, you're probably thinking it's going to be a nightmare. You're going to constantly miss and everything's going to be out of focus. Well, at first, that's true to a smaller extent, but to a larger extent, you will get very good at it very quickly. And what I found is when I go out manual focusing now, within a few minutes, I start to tune into it. And even if you've never used manual focus before, I would suggest if you're shooting for an hour, at the end of the hour, you're going to be surprised at how quick you get at it. Keeping in mind, manual focus used to be the only kind of focus. So there's a whole history of photographs you've seen in history class and everything starting from about, I don't know, 20 or 30 years ago and beyond was all manual focus. So the whole world of everybody who did photo and video, everyone manual focus. So it isn't beyond your capabilities to be able to do this, I promise. And as I said, there's a couple of key powerful tools that the Canon M50 gives us to help us with manual focus. And one of them is called focus peaking. And this is a little bit hard to explain, but essentially what happens is when you are focusing the image, The areas that are sharp and in focus, the actual camera can tell which areas are sharp and in focus. And it will actually highlight those with either your choice of like red, blue, or yellow, these little sparkly things. As I said, it's a little bit hard to explain, but basically what happens is whatever's in focus will kind of look like it's got a glowing outline around it. That helps you identify where your focus plane is. The other one that it's got is a punch-in, which allows you to just click a little thing on the screen. It's a little magnifying glass, and you can click in once, and it'll give you a 5 times punch-in. So now you've got a close-up of the thing that you're looking at or the thing that you want to focus on, or you hit a second time and it punches in 10 times. You can then use your sort of thumb to move around the screen to figure out where you want to be sort of that punched-in area to be. Is it in the center of the frame, or is it off to the left or off to the right, what have you. These two tools are super powerful, and after you use them a few times, it becomes very, very intuitive, and you will find yourself nailing focus all the time. Yeah, it won't be 100%. You'll miss sometimes, but you'll miss with autofocus sometimes as well. I think this is really kind of a small sacrifice for the type of image that we're actually getting and the fact that we're getting it at this price point. So do not be afraid of manual focus. Do not be afraid of manual aperture. I absolutely know you can do it, and you really just have to give it a try. Now, I said I would tell you how I got some of the cheapest lenses I got, and this is a little trick that a lot of people don't know, but it is a super, super cool thing, and you're gonna feel like you've just got the cheat code to getting vintage lenses after I tell you this. Essentially, what you wanna do is after you do some research and you find some of the lenses that you think you might be interested in trying out, rather than going on to your different forums, whether it be sort of eBay or Craigslist or what have you, or even going out to sort of garage sales or sort of flea markets, what have you, and looking for a lens where people have the lenses sitting here and they're all labeled nicely, look for vintage cameras. And what I have found with a number of the lenses in my collection, at least 50% of them, I've actually found a camera advertised on eBay or any of these places at a certain price. No mention of what the lens was. And then if you look in the photos and you see what it says on the lens, what you'll often identify is they will be selling a complete camera that no one's even interested in. Maybe it's been sitting there for ages and the price on it is, say, $35. But if you actually look at the lens, something they haven't mentioned in the description, haven't mentioned anywhere in the title, the lens is actually a lens that generally sells for $65, $70, maybe even $100 plus. So the person selling it doesn't realize that the lens is actually worth more than the camera body. The camera body is essentially worthless. So if you really want to get a deal, look around for vintage cameras, used cameras, old cameras, and try to identify what the lens is. And sometimes they won't have a good photo of the front of the lens, and that's really where you look at the front of the lens, and that's where you're actually going to see the markings of what the lens is. Sometimes they won't have a good photo of the front of the lens, and you can just ask them directly, can you send me a photo of the front of the lens, or can you tell me what the writing is on the front of the lens? And that is going to allow you to sort of unlock this whole world of vintage lenses, which are pretty affordable to begin with. But using this method, you're probably going to be able to find them at times for a half to a third of what they really should cost. And then once you're done with them, you just take the lens off, list that online or list it for sale, list it for 3 times the price, and take the camera body and just throw that up online for 10 or 15 bucks, or throw it into a garage sale, what have you. And you can make some separate money on that. As I said, the camera bodies aren't worth much, but they tend to be sort of like a little bit of a collector thing, or people might put them on their shelves as just something cool to look at. And if you're interested in getting better results in photography with your Canon M50, one of the best videos I've ever done on this, I have just thrown on screen now. And if you watch this video, I promise at the end of the video, you are going to be a better photographer than you are right now.